Hi, everyone. My name is Susie Salami. I'm the Director of Social Work at the Innocence Project. Thank you so much for joining us here today for this Facebook live event. I'm excited to be here today to host this conversation with our three incredible panelists. It's going to be a powerful conversation that we will all learn from. I'm going to introduce them in a moment, but first I want to encourage all of you to send in your questions in the comments section. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the conversation. Please show our panelists some love, showing their courage and strength while sharing their stories and experiences with us. Mother's Day was created to express love and gratitude to mothers, acknowledging the sacrifices women make for their children. Today, we gathered three women who were wrongly convicted and incarcerated, robbed of their rights as mothers. We wanted to give space to their experience of not only motherhood, but the consequential grief from the forced loss of their children, as well as the healing and repair that all of them have been involved with on their journey since release. Heidi Goodwin was wrongfully convicted of first-degree assault of a child that was in her care. Her conviction was a result of the now outdated shaken baby syndrome, which left her without a scientifically adequate defense at the time of her trial in 2003. Heidi was released in 2014, but 2 years later, Washington state courts finally overturned her conviction based on new evidence in the case. Heidi's fight is still not over as she continues to seek relief and justice for the wrongful conviction that separated her from her family and children who were just 9, 5, and 2 when she was incarcerated. Heidi serves on both the Exonerated Advisory Board for Exonerated Nation and on a peer-to-peer advisory committee for healing justice. Heidi now carries her lived experience into a formal role as a client support coordinator with the Washington Innocence Project. Sabrina Butler Smith was a loving teenage mother when she was wrongfully convicted in the death of her 9-month-old son in Mississippi. She was later exonerated of all wrongdoing after spending 6.5 years incarcerated, 2 of those years on death row. She was the first woman exonerated from death row in the United States. She now works to change legislation, determined to make the system better so others, especially youth, do not have to experience what she did. And last but not least, Elizabeth Ramirez was one of the 4 women known as the San Antonio Four: Ana Vasquez, Elizabeth Ramirez, Christy Mayhew, and Cassandra Rivera, who were wrongfully convicted of the sexual assault of 2 underage girls. Elizabeth was convicted in 1997 and sentenced to 37.5 years. Her son Hector was 2 years old when she was entered into the Hobby Prison Unit to serve a 37.5-year sentence. She spent 17 years in prison for a crime she did not commit, and she was finally exonerated in 2016 when the court declared her and her 3 co-defendants factually innocent. Thank you all for being here. I know this is a loaded conversation, but one that your voice is so important to, and in fact, we could not have it without you. So I thank you all for being here. We have a limited amount of time, so I just want to start sort of quickly with each of you taking time to let us know how your wrongful conviction case affected your rights as parents while you were incarcerated, and were you able to maintain visitation or relationship with your children? Heidi, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Susie. So when I actually was going through the trial in my case, I was pregnant with my youngest son, Dylan, and then I also had my daughter, Rachel, and my son, Derek. From the conviction in 2003 to the time that I actually started serving any time in 2006, from being out on an appellate bond, I was blessed because the judge in my case, and I think this was kind of a precursor to how much doubt there was around it, he decided to deny the state's request to remove my children from my care. And so while I was out on the appeal bond, I continued to raise my children. When I started serving the sentence in 2006, I had to our state allows overnight visits and different family programs that you can participate in with your children. Even though I had this history of the courts allowing me to remain with my children during the whole initial appeal process, and there was nothing in my judgment and sentence to state that I, wasn't supposed to be around my children or any children. The Department of Corrections still required that I take psychological tests and all kinds of hoops to jump through to prove that I was not a danger so that I could participate in the programs available at the prison to see my children, stay overnight with them. And so, yeah.
Liz, would you mind sharing with us your experience?
Yes, I remember when I got my time in 97, my son was just going to turn 2. And because of my charges, I wasn't able, because it's a sexual assault to a child, I wasn't able to have any contact with anyone under the age of 18. And so even at the county, before I was transferred to the prison, I could have a visit with him, but it was 15 minutes and it was to the glass. And since my son was so young, my mother wouldn't bring him to visit. So when I was transferred to TDC, of course, they had me registered, and all my visits pretty much were through the glass. And my son came to visit one time, and he was 4 years old, which was the first and the only visit I ever had the whole 17 years. I remember him talking to me and asking me, Mama, we can take a bus back home. We can all fit in a bus, but it was very difficult. I wrote him letters a lot, and I made him, because he was growing up, made him flashcards. But I was the whole time. It was difficult for me, and it was hard. It was really hard because there's nothing you can do in the system that would help you to have that relation. Even as a wrongful conviction, someone claiming to be innocent, of course you're convicted, so there's no open doors for you to even try to fight that. So I didn't have that relationship with my son.
Yes, thank you. And Sabrina, if you don't mind letting us know about your experience.
Yes. First of all, I want to say thank you guys for having me. And in my experience, I had 2 boys at the time, my oldest son, Danny, and my son that passed, Walter. My oldest son was with his grandparents, and it was hard for me because me and his grandmother really didn't have a relationship. So therefore, I did not get the chance to, see him or anything. And she actually reared him against me. So once I was exonerated, it was very hard for me to establish a connection with him at first, because she didn't think that I would be released from incarceration. Once my sentence was overturned and I was exonerated of any wrongdoing, it still was a battle. It's hard when you become forced into the system of no wrongdoing, and then you have to try to, get back with your children. And it was hard, at first. Being in that place, not being able to see my son was tragic to me, and then losing my little boy on top of that. So it was double hard. And yeah, it was hard.
Yeah, I think the sudden loss of freedom on top of that loss of parenting, of motherhood, especially for, a newborn child, and Liz, when you were talking about not only seeing your child once, I mean, these are impossible circumstances for anyone, but to manage a relationship while being incarcerated and not having choices is compounding the trauma. Can you talk a little bit about the impact, both on you all as mothers and then of your children as well? I mean, there was obvious emotional trauma that was placed upon you, and the children as well, in terms of how they were able to connect with you. I know, Heidi, you had a little bit more room to see them and to parent in another way. You talked about, I think it was Girl Scouts being involved in that. And so each prison had their own rules depending, and it affected you all differently. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the impact, I think, is that we when the separation occurs and we're incarcerated, we have, because of the environment that we're in, we have to quickly overcome like this piece of us that was just ripped away. And we have to do that because we have to learn how to exist within a prison with 900, in my case, 900 other women. And you can't really allow that hole that's just been suddenly created in you to overcome you, if that makes sense. For my children, I think that the impact, the emotional trauma on them was different. I think for my older two, Rachel and Derek, who were 9 and 5, they took on kind of a role reversal of feeling like they had to step up and kind of take care of their dad and even, me. For my daughter in particular, because she was older, I feel like her role reversal kind of went a little deeper, as in she even just tried to take on my role specifically. For example, it was a comfort to her to wear my wedding ring, like once I was gone. And she really stepped up to try to like take care of her brothers. For my youngest, Dylan, he was 2. He does not remember me ever being out. And so he was in the middle of potty training when I went in, and that regressed for him. He really had a hard time like completing that timely because it kind of interrupted his process. And then having to come to the prison to see me and use metal silver toilets that were very alien and object looking to him, it just really kind of set him back in potty training. Those are some of the emotional things that I think my kids kind of, and I think to this day, they still have remnants of this trauma that started at that time.
I'm sure they do. And Liz, you said that you were, you saw him, he was 2 years old. Hector was 2 years old when you went in. He came in once when you were 4. And then what happened after that? How has your relationship been since then? I know you're now a grandma, which is a big delight for you, and huge congratulations on that part. And I'm sure on some level that gives you the space to experience that mothering, even if it's in the form of grandparent, in a way that was taken from you before.
Yes, Izzy, that's correct. Because we didn't have any time together, I wrote him a lot of letters. I still have a letter that he sent me when he was like 8 years old. And it was very difficult. Of course, like Heidi mentioned, when you're incarcerated, you can't show that emotion. You're left and you have that void. And, of course, you just had this child and you want to mother them and protect them and take care of them. And here you are just ripped from them. And every day you think about, God, how can they be saved? God, how can they be, show love and, protection at the time? And so I felt like through my letters and through constant writing, every other day or every week and trying to reach out, to get the help. That was my way of to try to fill that void. But a lot of times of course, in prison you work, and that was like my outlet to be able to take that frustration out. And of course, throughout the years, you wonder, what does he do in school? What's his favorite color? How does he interact with other children? And then for him, he's, when I came home, he was 18 years old. And without that physical interaction, that was the first time my son, my only child, told me he loved me. And that was just so overwhelming. But now it's like you come home and you don't know how to be a mother. You don't know how to interact with them. You're not sure how their, thought processes or anything. And so even now he's a Marine and he's stationed in South Carolina. And so we communicate. And like you mentioned, I had my first grandbaby. Her name is Scarlett Jo. And being away, we don't have that healing process. And so, of course, everybody goes through daily life of healing. And so we talk on the phone. But as far as sitting down and just discussing, me leaving and the wrongful conviction, we've never had that healing process. We've never been able just to share. and he's kind of like shut down to it. It's not something, I don't know if y'all ever seen the documentary. He's kind of shy and just really doesn't speak a whole lot. And so I feel that the trauma with that, it's like, I'll just tuck it all in, and mom's home now, so I'll just go forward from here and leave the rest, where it needs to be. But now that he has his own child, I don't want that to affect, him raising his child and his marriage and everything else. I want him to be open and heal from that. Because 17 years is a long time to be without your mother. Even though he had his father and his stepmom, it's not the same as your mother's love.
Yeah, I imagine, that you all are inside and you're not allowed actually to feel your own emotions because you're surviving, right? So you're dealing with a sense, I'm assuming, of some hypervigilance from what people have told me. You're having to make sure you're safe, and then you're also worried about your children, right? And you're far from them. So to keep them safe while you're feeling very vulnerable inside and having to shut down in order to survive, they probably on some level had to do that as well to survive. So it is, there is a double effect that this had on your family. Sabrina, you also had to deal with just the grief of losing your son while being charged for his death. And so I can't imagine that level of sadness and unjustness that you must have felt.
It was horrible because, not only not knowing, and the key thing to mine was that I didn't know what he passed from. And so here I'm trying to go in within myself to figure out, what happened. That was worse for me. And then trying to stay alive, because being charged with the killing of a child is horrible. When especially, I started off in the county jail. So my life was like fighting to stay alive because people were, they were calling me baby killer and monster and all this kind of stuff. And I was having to deal with that, along with knowing that I had a 2-year-old out there with his grandmother that I had no contact with. So it was double hard for me because, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what was happening to me, really, because I was like, this is a joke. This is a dream. I mean, here I am trying to save my son, and they called me a murderer. And I've seen so many other cases that are totally different from mine, and I had to go through this. And so it was hard for me. It was hard. I keep saying it was hard because it was the worst thing. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, to have to be put through this type of thing. And then to know that this is my son and I'm accused of killing my own child.
Susie, I had a thought with listening to Sabrina and Liz that I just wanted to add, with our children that were still out there. I think one of the things that I could relate it to possibly is you fiercely love your children, and that never changes. And even with my situation where I did still get to see them, it's almost like a piece of us has to let them go at the same time. And so when we get out and we are trying to figure out how to parent again, we have that missing piece still, because it's like adopting a child. You adopt a child out when they're little, and then maybe you get reconciled with them later on in adult life, but there's something slightly missing there.
All of you have talked about the work you've done since being released. I know, Heidi, you have a child that you've had since release. There is, I'm sure, a different perspective. I mean, as everyone ages, and if you have a child later on in life, but especially concerning this specific situation. And I'm wondering sort of how you feel post-release with having a second child, and also how your children, the 3 children who you had before you went in, how they all relate to each other. I'm sure well, but there's probably a huge significant difference in your life experience.
Yeah. My children are very close, very close. I think the trauma has bound them together, in that way. And their younger sister, Havana, who is 3, she's the baby. I mean, their little sister, they absolutely love her. For me, Havana was very unexpected. I was 40 years old when I had her, and didn't think that it was possible. And so she was very unexpected. And when I found out that I was pregnant, I just felt re-traumatized all over again. My case is still in process. And so there's still so many question marks. And I remember finding out I was pregnant and like getting into an empty bathtub fully clothed and just breaking down crying, because like in my mind, I was like, I don't know how to do this again. I can't do this again, because I just felt like I had the fear, like all the fear that they imposed on me in the beginning came back to me. Like the fight went out of me. And I was just afraid for another little child that everything could repeat. And so I'm still kind of trying to process that. There's times where I've said it in other interviews where like I'll get triggered by like folding her clothes, little baby clothes, and it takes me back to like the feeling of other baby clothes being ripped out of my hands, and that I didn't get to complete, like, being a mother and raising my other children. And my little daughter now, she like, I have to look away and sometimes like compose myself, because she has no idea that her presence is absolutely the most healing thing to me ever, but very, very heartbreaking at the same time.
Sabrina, you had your other son. And so tell us a little bit about how you were able to parent your other child, if you were able to, what you've done since your release. I know you've been out for a while now.
I had to fight to get him back. It took me 4 years. When I was exonerated, he was 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have any contact with him until I got an attorney. And that took 4 years to be able to get my son. But in the process of that, I found out he had a disability. So it made it even harder, because they taught him, to call them mom and dad. So he, didn't have that connection with me. You know what I'm saying? And that was heartbreaking, because, I'm like, the people that had him, they didn't understand that, what they were doing to me, as far as the connection with my son. So once I did get him back, it wasn't that bad, but it wasn't that good either. And then I ended up having 2 more other children, and my daughter, she was born with the same disease my son died from. So that's even harder, because she's 18 years old now, to date. And that's a battle, trying to keep her going. You know what I mean? Because, this was done to me, and now my daughter has the same thing, and they seem like they can't fix it. They're saying that there's no cure to it. So every day is harder than each day, because I don't want to lose my daughter too, for the same thing. And so I stay prayed up, and I don't like to get in these spaces as much, because I have to stay strong for her. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I have to stay strong for her, because she needs me. Danny, my oldest boy, is 34 years old now, but he's with me. So, and he's doing good. He has his disability, but he's doing really good. And, I love him and wouldn't give anything for him. We had to go through that, but he understands. Now he does. And my other 2, I have a 23-year-old. He's a boy. He's in the service too. He's stationed in Atlanta. But like I said, the hardest part now is dealing with my 18-year-old with the same thing. And it's called polycystic kidney disease.
I wanted to ask one of the questions that came in from our audience. This is from Trish Seward. Did it seem like mothers tended to gravitate towards one another in prison to support and encourage one another more so than other women? I don't know if you all experienced that or what you have to say about that.
I was in maximum security, so I didn't get a chance to do any of that. I was not allowed to be around other females. So mine was no contact for 2 years, 9 months. on death row.
And for me, I would have to say, because of the charges, it was difficult because, of course, in prison, nobody likes a child molester. And so you kind of have to like stand up for yourself, and you don't really talk a whole lot. And of course, you don't want to tell them you have a child and then they're like, what did they do to the other child, or, something of that sort. But I'll have to say that I made amazing friends in there, people that were parents, people that weren't. And, I was able to talk about it to some, and some I wasn't. But I think all of us incarcerated, being away from our children, it impacts us all in there. And we kind of just know, we just know, the love of a mother and being separated, and you just kind of support each other in some way. If it's just, walking on the rec yard, or just, during the holidays, doing a little spread, as they say in there, just those are the things that give us comfort in prison while we're away from our families, because in there, it's like they become your family.
Yeah, it's interesting, Heidi, just before we get to you, because I'm thinking about the way that we've seen for the women clients that we have at IP, but across the network, how much sexism actually plays a role in the charges that you all were wrongly convicted of. You see the women most often are wrongly convicted of harming either their children or someone else's children, or a partner of theirs, as this hysterical, they lost their mind and had to kill their husband type of accusation. And in your case, it was also homophobia. With the four of you, they decided that this was because of your sexual orientation, that you were guilty of sexually assaulting two children, that I think were your nieces. So there's this intersection of oppression that you had to deal with on top of it, and then to go to prison, being accused of such a thing, as we know, as you just said, is an extra layer of harm that you then have to deal with and protect yourself from. So I just want to acknowledge that as something else that you also had to deal with. Heidi, when you were inside, you talked to me about how you were able to form relationships with other mothers, and actually that the prison administration came to you to help deal with better relationships among the women prisoners. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, like Liz said, once I got over the initial kind of like adjustment and hump of getting used to the women in there and them getting used to me, we did start to form like really strong bonds, especially like our Girl Scout troop. The moms in there were really tight, really solid. And we did actually, I was approached and asked to become a facilitator for women who were just getting to the prison, on how to basically have a better relationship from inside with their children and with their caregivers. And so there was a group of us, we called it the moms group, that would go down to the receiving unit and provide these orientations for the women. These developed and got stronger to the point that we actually were able to start like, it was called the Women's Village, and it encompassed a whole bunch of different things like education and environment, but family support became one of those. And from there we took it and were able to get more access and more events and more things that would benefit women rebuilding their relationships with their children while inside and while they were getting ready to transition out. From the Girl Scout troop that I was in, one of the mothers that I had been in that troop with, and our daughters were in there together, of course, she still had a significant amount of time to do once I was released. Her daughter was 12 or 10 when I was released. I'd known her since she was 5. And at the age of 12, she actually came to live with me and I raised her for 4 years. And so that's kind of like how close we were.
Wow. I wanted to, one of the questions that I think people want to know is, what are some of your favorite things that you do now? Probably both for you, but also for your kids. I know a lot of your kids are older, but now that you're out and you've been out for a fair amount of time, what feels like connected? What helps you feel connected? What helps you feel close and calm and loving with each other?
Is there anyone you want me to go, or?
Sure, go ahead.
What I do, like I was saying earlier before we got on, I sort of live my life in bliss now. I just can't stay in a stressed and emotional state. I have to figure out how to, keep myself going. And we get out, me and my kids, even though they're grown, we still get out. We go riding. We take I like looking at the trees. I like looking at the stuff that we took for granted before we went in. You know what I'm saying? I enjoy what God has around me. We'll go swimming. If it's too cold, we'll go walking. We'll just do things to keep us going and stay grounded, to make us closer to each other. And so now I think our relationship is much, it's better because we're able to talk to each other and express, the things that are going on. You know what I'm saying? Me and my daughter, my son, we have a lovely relationship. They talk to me about anything. Boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, they feel comfortable with doing that. And, I'm silly and goofy anyway. And I like that because that keeps my kids, grounded, to let them know that no matter how serious or strong a situation can be, I take it that this is just a test and it's not going to last forever. Whatever has a starting point, it has to end. So that is the way I continue to, get healing from what has happened to me in the past. And I use that to generate my blissfulness. You know what I'm saying? And then when I'm talking to other people, I try to send that energy to them because I want you to know, Heidi and Liz, that, this is just a test. It's not going to be always. The way you say about your daughter, Heidi, you got it. You got this. You got it. Liz, you got it. The continuing thing, just continue to do what you're doing. Because we're all going to come to that place in one point in our life to where we can fix this. I think we can fix it with our children, especially, and I work hard to do that. So, that's what I think that matters.
For me, a lot of times I'll go visit my son in South Carolina. He's in a Paris Island. So, we go out there and we'll visit with him. He loves fishing. That boy, if he can get on a boat and go fishing, that's his thing, is he loves fishing and barbecuing. So, and I think that's what kind of, keeps us together is, that family orientation. And, now with the grandbaby, and we have another grandbaby coming on the way. And so it's just like life is just going about and we're just trying to make the best of it and live it to the fullest, Just like Sabrina said, I love being outside. I like going for walks. Those are the things that, I remember sitting out in the rec yard and just looking at the trees. And I have so many flowers in my backyard.
I know, right?
Right. And so I just love it, because just those little things I appreciate, in life. And those are the things I share with my son and my daughter-in-law. And that FaceTime with my grandbaby, it's like you can't miss, a whole lot because you're able to see them, your reactions. And, she's got 3 teeth that came in. So, those are my ways to stay connected to them, even at a distance.
Yeah, we love outdoors as well. And I think that music really connects us. The kids and I are able to kind of bring my son plays the guitar. And so that kind of like brings us all together, or we'll go to concerts and things like that together. And that I love that feeling of having them all just, there's something about it that is, it does help us all recover, I think, as those moments. And of course, with Havana, my youngest, I think that in a way, it might have helped with the older 3 because now my attention is really super focused on her and not so hyper focused on them because they're all older. They don't need me to hover over them like they did, when they were little or while I was inside and trying to stay on top of all of the things that I needed to. And I think it drove them a little crazy after I had got out and I was still trying to kind of keep track of everything. And they're not at that age anymore. Like they're getting more independent and wanting to be independent. And so Havana coming along shifted my attention. And so I think that's helped my relationship with the other three as well. And so, yeah, we FaceTime a lot. My older daughter, Rachel, and I and her sister were just like for an hour, just FaceTiming the other day. So
Technology helps for sure. I think some folks are asking, what is a way that outside people, the average citizen, can help folks who are inside, and especially mothers who are separated from their children. It's important, obviously, to support fathers as well, but in this specific context, what is something that you needed that would have helped? I mean, obviously to be free and be out of there, but that would have helped your children. I know there's some organizations that do that work. Was there anything that you all thought of that could be helpful that people can utilize now?
Pen pals was one. And then getting to know somebody outside that wouldn't mind in the state where our children are. Let's go by and, see the people that are keeping them and see if it's okay, get that channel of connection to see if, they could see them and maybe get pictures or, do something that would help us inside so we wouldn't worry it. That's what I say. Worry so bad, It's someone that's willing to do that, to help us. That's what I thought.
It's the same thing for me. I remember the whole time Angel Tree. Every year I used to sign my son up for Angel Tree for him to get a gift during Christmas time. The holidays are the hardest for us all. And even for our children, because being separated, we're not there to share that holiday with them. And so Angel Tree was such a big thing. And during the holidays, that's one thing I try to focus on is just giving gifts, for the children and the mothers incarcerated or even people military that are away, but especially mothers incarcerated, a lot of times, just like Sabrina said, I'll write, some of the ladies in there and I'll pull pictures and send them, in the mail just to give them that sense of connection still. A lot of them, their children are already grown and have their own children and they're able to see, through the pictures, the life that they're living. And that's a big thing is, people in there don't get any mail and receiving mail or emails. I mean, it gives you a purpose in there because you have to write someone or you have something to do. Every day, people look forward to the mail, and I think that's, a big impact that would help a lot of the women that are incarcerated.
I think so I would want the public to know, like, we are not just a documentary or a podcast or a case. When those doors open and we're finally released, like, that is just the beginning of our struggles sometimes. When I came home, my children were 9, 5, and 2 when I went in. They picked me up from the prison themselves in a car. And they were immediately in my care, and I couldn't even shop for them at a store because I was so overwhelmed by the crowds and all the choices in a grocery store. And that made me feel like a failure because I couldn't do these simple tasks that are normalized to everybody else. I would want people to understand that whether you're in Washington or Texas or Tennessee or New York or in another country, find out where your innocence organization is. Find out if you can provide help to those of us that have gotten out and are trying to pick up the pieces and rebuild. Because a lot of the times the public just sees the end of the documentary and either the fight is still on to get one of our brothers and sisters out, or it shows the victory of the release and then it ends and they don't realize that we're still out here fighting to build our lives and pick up the pieces and our children.
Absolutely. And that is one of the questions that came in actually for Liz, sort of in what you were talking about, Heidi, how it felt to see your story, excuse me, in Southwest of Salem and all of you, like your public face, you are talking about your experience, you're using your voice to create a narrative so that people understand your particular experience. But I also imagine that it does feel very vulnerable, right? So there's probably two sides of the coin for all that. But what did it feel like for you, Liz?
It was hard because, when you first come out, you start from the beginning. 17 years of your life, and you have to driver's license, social security. Where do you start from all that? Technology and everything has just, changed from 97 to 2013. Where do you start? And if it wasn't for my family and, and their support, and some of us don't have that, like Heidi said, where do we go to reach out for these resources to help us? We didn't have a toothbrush and nothing to our name, walking out those doors. And, that's what we need, is that guidance. And it's so overwhelming because, I remember going to the grocery store, like Heidi said, and I didn't even know what I liked. I was just so used to what, what was there, that I never could, broaden my horizons. And now, there's such a variety of things. But where do you start? It's just so the basic things in life that you have to, start up with. And you don't have that, especially with the wrongful conviction. You lose so much. And then you come home and you have to pick up the pieces.
Absolutely. When I got out, it took me 10 years to trust. I ain't trust nobody. And I certainly didn't trust the police. I'm just serious. I didn't, and then getting back to my children, as far as, I used to get up every night like clockwork and go in the rooms and check and make sure they were still breathing on my watch. And, it was traumatizing then, because I was scared. I didn't want anything to happen to my kids, And so, yes, it is hard when you get out, and it's not just, us doing these speaking events and all this stuff like that and getting it out. There's a real need for exonerate women. There's a real need, and we don't have that need. And I just don't think it's right. I think that, the system needs to fix what they messed up, because Heidi didn't break it. Liz didn't break it. I didn't break it. I didn't say, hey, look at me, I want to go to prison. I didn't say that. It was thrust upon us. So I think that they should have, things in place where we can learn how. And before the women get out, I think they should have programs to teach you how to get on the computer, what to look for, all this electronics and stuff that they have, so that a woman would be prepared when she steps out and know how to pump gas or go to the grocery store, do some type of something, to help, so that they won't be just all over the place trying to figure out what to do, because that is overwhelming if you don't know.
Heidi, did you want to add anything?
I think beyond just finding out what innocence organizations are in your area, I think, there are two very established and strong organizations in the country. One is on the West Coast, one is on the East Coast, Exonerated Nation in California and Healing Justice in North Carolina, who are doing that after work with families. So their program is extended into our families that have been affected by this wrongful conviction.
Yeah, the what you all said, of course, is extremely true. And the other side of it is that I've seen so many people with enormous amounts of resilience grow and get through the technology, like what you all are doing, recovering your life and taking it back, and showing an incredible amount of strength and vulnerability at the same time, both today and then every day, right? This is what you do. This is your life. You've taken it back, and you go full steam ahead in the work you do, in the story that you tell that is your truth. So I want to thank you all for taking the time, for sharing your story with us today, with the whole audience. It is incredibly powerful, and we all support you and will continue to do so. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susie.